What's going on, everyone? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres with ScoopDuck on 3. It is Monday, December 16th, 2024, and we got some big transfer portal news to get into on today's episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I am joined by ScoopDuck owner and publisher Justin Hopkins. J-Hop, how are you?
Good. I just noticed that my camera was pretty dirty there. I must have stuck my finger on it earlier. So that was the reason for the blackout. But we're back and we're rolling and we're good. And I don't know. I think the last time you and I did one of these was like a full week ago. So glad to be back and getting one of these rolling out for sure.
Yeah, it's been a little minute, but there of course is more to talk about. Oregon may not be playing until New Year's Day in the Rose Bowl against the winner of Ohio State and Tennessee, but there's still stuff to talk about as we've seen some transfer portal developments. That's the main thing that we're tracking right now over at ScoopDuck. Dana Altman and the Ducks got a new basketball commitment we'll talk about a little bit later on today. So let's hop right into it, Justin. They have two new commitments to talk about, both coming from the transfer portal for Dan Lanning and the Ducks. Things got going with former Purdue safety Dillon Thieneman, who announced his commitment to Oregon on Saturday. And we can obviously talk more about him as a player, and I'll share some tidbits from my interview with him. But I think the craziest thing is like Oregon's preparing for the playoff, and they already have one of their major needs to some degree for next year addressed. And they went into the portal to get Thieneman, who was on 3's number 1 transfer portal safety, number 3 overall transfer portal prospect. So you're checking a major box here, and you're not even in the offseason yet.
Yeah, tight end, tackle, safety. Those were the keys for Dan Lanning in this transfer portal. I'm not saying those are the only positions they'll get guys at. We know that's not the case, but I think those are the ones. If you said, "Hey, what's the top 2 or 3 needs?" You can lump safety in there, and you just went and got a dude. They're already talking about this guy being an early round. This is basically really kind of an equivalent to Caleb Downs last year. Is the kind of caliber of safety that you got this year in Thieneman. So just a massive pickup for the Ducks. Great to bring him in, when he gets here and be able to put him, with the 5 stars that you signed in the 2025 class and, any of those guys in the 2024 class that you've, developed over the course of a year. So just going to steady that room, going to take a lot of the heavy lifting off there. It's always nice to have a guy. I think the biggest thing is great player. But you're going to have a guy with experience back there, and you need sort of that quarterback of the secondary back there. It's important to have a linebacker that communicates well too, but you need one of your safeties or corners kind of leading that group in that manner as well. And I think you'll see a guy like Dillon Thieneman come in and have no problem doing that. So you're getting a great player. All the reports that we've heard, and I'm sure you enjoyed your talk with him, is that he's a great person off the field as well too. So another guy that's going to buy into the culture, and make no doubt about it. This is a top 5 transfer regardless of position. This is a guy that Ohio State, Texas, Bama, everybody wanted him. This was one of the guys that everyone wanted, and Oregon obviously did a great job getting him on campus and getting him committed, and basically saying we're done at safety, moving on.
And this one came together pretty quickly, Justin. You mentioned Ohio State as another school that was in the mix there with Dillon Thieneman. Oregon was the first school to get him on campus, and they converted that very quickly into a commitment. So you got to love how the staff is working quickly to address some of these needs, all while preparing for the Rose Bowl. As we mentioned earlier, I was able to catch up with Thieneman to get an interview on his commitment, on his decision, which you can read with all the quotes over at ScoopDuck.com. So definitely encourage you guys to go check that out over there. Asked him about why he wanted to go to Oregon, and he said, quote, talking with the staff, with Dan Lanning, Coach Lapoy, Coach Hampton, kind of all on the same page. I really saw myself developing the correct way to take my game to the next level in the scheme that they have at Oregon. They're losing some guys, and then I can fill that spot. They're losing like the whole back end, so they want to bring in someone to kind of be a leader, someone with experience that can help bring up the young guys and to control the defense from a back end standpoint. So all those together, that's kind of why I chose it. So I think you get a proven guy who's already played 2 years of high level football at Purdue, a former freshman, defensive freshman of the year. So someone who knows the conference, has played all of the big time programs in the Big Ten. So when you have a guy like that you can bring in to be an instant impact guy, and then like you mentioned, Justin, bring up some of these younger guys at the safety position, like a Trey McNutt who's coming in, like a Kingston Lopa who saw his name and number called in the Big Ten title game, that's a recipe for success. So I really like this addition. A 6-foot guy, 200 plus pounds. I think he's going to be a great pickup and a great impact guy for the Ducks.
Yeah, one of my favorite parts is you watch the highlights or film or whatever, and this guy's a smasher. Like, he will absolutely take your head off if given the chance, but he's not only a smasher. It's not just somebody that comes up and makes a big hit and gets lost in coverage. This is a guy that can really do it all. So that's probably my favorite part about him, is that you kind of do get that enforcer in your secondary, but it's not just an enforcer that gets beat by the deep ball every time. So really good, well-rounded safety. This is a guy that likely comes to Oregon for a year. He does have 2 years of eligibility left if he wanted to use them, but he's going to come for a year more than likely. And I bet you see him as an early round guy, whether it's first round, second round, potentially third round. This is going to be an early round guy more than likely after this season. So you'll take the 1 year rental. And if you need another guy after that, we are confident that Dan Lanning will figure that out along the way.
Looking at some of the stats here for Thieneman, he's played in 24 games across 2 seasons, and he's had more than 100 total tackles in both of those years, Justin. So certainly a high-end production guy. Really just took the Big Ten by storm as a true freshman when he logged 6 interceptions. Lost a little bit of that juice this year. No picks for him on the stat sheet. But 8 pass breakups as a freshman, 6 this past season. So certainly an active defender, defensive back, a guy who can get in the backfield as well. 4.5 tackles for loss. So I think those are numbers that you can certainly work with if you're Chris Hampton and the rest of this defensive staff at Oregon. And I think the question that I have, Justin, you alluded to it a little bit, and we've talked about it before. So I'm going to throw a bit of a 2-parter at you. Again, and we've talked about it, but I think it bears mentioning. How do we feel about Oregon using the portal to fill out its safety room, maybe more than they would potentially like? And do you think Oregon needs another safety?
Yeah, I'll answer the second part first. I think they're done at safety. I do think that, and now let me clarify something. I do think that potentially Oregon could target somebody for that nickel star position, which how you define that, is that a corner, is that a safety? It's really, obviously it's kind of both when you play the star. So, I'll say Oregon's not going to go after a pure safety, but they will identify somebody that either plays corner or safety. That's what their label will be on their profile, but they're going to come in for that star position. And then I think that other safety position is going to be, more than likely one of your, redshirt freshmen, one of your true freshmen, somebody that's, coming in this class or been in the program already. So, and in terms of going after safety, I felt, for me, just looking at the team and what's coming back, it certainly felt like that was one of, like I said, the top 3 positions that they needed to find at least somebody. And the reason I say that, I think there's no doubt that Trey McNutt and some of the other defensive backs that they're bringing in this class are uber talented guys and have the potential to be really good for Oregon for a few years. It's still really dangerous if you're going to count on 3, freshmen or redshirt freshmen to fill in those 3 spots, the 2 safeties and the star position. So I think bringing in somebody with experience for a year, letting a couple guys battle out for that other position, obviously both will grow along the way. And then if both are ready next year, you're in good hands. So I think it's a perfect segue. Again, I know that Thieneman does have multiple years left, but I don't think you're getting him out of him. I think he's going to be a one and done guy and head to the NFL. So I have no problem with Oregon's, supplement of the transfer portal. I know I've said for a while now, I think this will be a little bit smaller of a transfer portal group, but it'll once again, just like the recruiting class, it'll be high on quality and low on quantity. So I think that's what you're seeing with the guys that Oregon's got committed so far.
And that point really speaks to Oregon and Dan Lanning being able to stack multiple elite recruiting classes, which they've done over the past couple of seasons. And with more high-end recruits coming in, with more of those guys seeing the field early and ultimately pushing starters for snaps right when they arrive, I think that's the perfect recipe that you want, because it's going to naturally decrease your need for talent in the transfer portal, and you can use it to supplement rather than to fill out your roster. So I think that that's certainly the recipe that they have cooking up there in Eugene, and the way they've been operating. How about we talk about another transfer portal commitment that the Ducks got? It was a little bit of a duo, 2 transfer portal commitments in just as many days for Dan Lanning and the Ducks, as they landed a commitment from former Northwestern safety Theran Johnson. The 5'11", 182-pound DB announced his commitment to Oregon following an official visit out to Eugene over the weekend. So Ducks get him on campus. He also visited Louisville, but and there was some contact with Texas A&M as well. But they go into, or should I say, stay in the Big Ten to poach one of the better DBs in the conference and add him to their roster to address a need with guys like Jabbar Muhammad, Dante Manning, Nico Reed, all exhausting their eligibility and moving on from the team after this season. So we knew that corner was probably going to be a position they would kind of look at their options for. I don't know that they'll attack it super heavily, but now you add an all Big Ten caliber defensive back to your roster in Theoren Johnson. What do you think of this pickup, Justin?
Yeah, once again, this is a guy that some pretty big schools wanted, and it's clear that this was not a fallback option. This was a guy that Oregon, targeted specifically, just like Thieneman, and said, "Hey, look, you're the guy we want. What's it going to take? Let's get you committed and let's keep this thing rolling." So, again, I don't think Oregon will pursue any other cornerbacks. Yes, they may end up signing another defensive back, but again, it will be somebody that ends up competing for that star position. So, as far as a true corner goes, Johnson will be the only guy, and obviously the last Johnson they signed in the secondary worked out well with Brandon Johnson coming from Duke last year. So, yeah, love the pickup. I don't like. I'd have to look more. I don't know that this is like a Jabbar Muhammad level pickup. I mean, Jabbar Muhammad was really good. Like, everybody wanted him. But I think this is a really solid, dependable pickup. I think you're pretty confident in some of the young guys that you've got there now that can play opposite him and rotate in along with Johnson. And so, again, Oregon got him in right away. It's clear that it was a guy that they wanted and made a very early push for to sign. So I'm going to go ahead and trust the staff on this one, that they know better than me, because I know they do. And I guess I'll say this: if Dan Lanning wants him, I want him. So Oregon's going to be in great shape in the secondary. You start looking at the breakdown of how many guys they have and where they're coming in. I noticed I recall you said something about stacking classes a moment ago, and that's like where we are. You have not stacked classes yet, technically, in my mind. You have, in the fact that you brought in a 24 class, and your 2025 class is going to be really good, but the 2025s aren't there yet, right? So we're kind of looking ahead a little bit. I think we have the foundation built to say, maybe you and I doing a recording next year at this time, that, hey, Dan Lanning has started stacking classes, because now you'll have those 24s that have been here for 2 years and the 25s that have been here for a year, and he's already got the number 1 class for 2026 started. That's when, okay, now you're really stacking those classes and doing what Nick Saban did at Bama, what Kirby Smart's doing at Georgia. And I think you continue to see, not that the transfer portal will go away. They will never not take guys through the transfer portal. I just think you'll see it get fewer and fewer. And we're already seeing that. I think it's going to be fewer this year than it has been the last 2 years. And again, if they continue on the trend they are with prep recruiting, it might be even less next year.
The Ducks go back into the portal to add another high-level proven defensive back in Theoren Johnson. And he talked a little bit about Oregon's success. And I asked him, why did you think Oregon was the place that was going to develop you and help you get to the NFL? Keep in mind, of course, that he only has so much more development that he needs. He's obviously already a pretty gifted player, and he's played a lot of ball, spent 4 years at Northwestern, but redshirted his true freshman year. But when I asked him that question, this was his response, quote, "It speaks for itself. Nico Reed, Jabbar Muhammad, they both transferred in. They're both now going to the league. Kyrie Jackson, he did the same thing. He had an opportunity to play in the league. Did the same thing with Christian Gonzalez. He came from Colorado, transferred in 1 year, sent him to the league. Their record speaks for itself. And the coaches, they like the DC, Tosh Lapoy. He comes from the NFL, but wants to be at Oregon. So they know what they're doing, and their record speaks for itself. And really, Justin, the longer that I do this and the more on-field results that you see from Oregon, it becomes a school that essentially sells itself. You don't need to do a lot of negative recruiting. You don't need to really continue to sell yourself when you can just point to the results that you're seeing on the field. And I've said for a long time, and I continue to believe this to a degree, that the NFL draft may be Oregon's best recruiting pitch because players want to come in, win a lot of games, compete for a national championship. Oregon's in the position to do just that. But at the end of the day, they want a place that is going to develop them and get them to the highest level, make them the best player that they possibly can be, and set them up for long-term success. And that's what Oregon's doing. I think Dan Lanning broke the program record this past year, sending guys to the NFL. And then this year, again, it looks like they're on track. Johnson was telling me they're projecting like 12 or 14 guys taken in the draft. So I think that was just a cool extra point, extra layer here, and why he wanted to come to Oregon and why people love what they're seeing from Dan Lanning.
Well, yeah, that was basically two of the missing links in Dan Lanning's resume, right? I mean, he got hired, started recruiting like a madman right out the gates. And, obviously the questions are, can he win? Can he develop? Well, now we're seeing those questions answered, right? Obviously 13-0 with a terrific season, Big Ten Conference champions. And last year, you start seeing these guys come in and they go into the NFL. You're going to see a really strong group of guys go to the NFL this year. So, I mean, he's really answering the questions and making it really hard on everyone else to negatively recruit him, right? And that was, again, that's what they all did. First it was Eugene's boring or it rains all the time or whatever. You don't hear that much anymore, all right? It's not really a thing. And, then, okay, who have they put in the league? Well, guess what? You start looking around the league and there's a lot of really good players in there. Obviously highlighted with Bo Nix and Justin Herbert and what they're doing. Gonzo is having an insane season. Javon Holland's back there, which really wasn't, any credit of Dan Lanning's. But you start looking into the league and seeing former Ducks in there. I noticed Troy Dye was starting the other day. I think he made his first start. Can't recall, but I mean, pretty cool for him to get in the league and make a start. And so, and Evan Williams with the Packers last night, I saw he was announced as a starter. So that's what we're seeing. And, if you're Dan Lanning, we know he can recruit. We know he can relate to these guys. We know he can motivate them. Well, now it's clear he has the coaches in place and a system in place that brings you in, develops you. And by the way, they win football games along the way. So, yeah, I mean, kind of the sky's the limit. And I think, a big thought, and I've talked about it before, is just, I think Saban got the Saban/Bama discount when NIL started and he was still at Alabama, because he was so well respected for winning championships and putting guys in the NFL. And Bama didn't necessarily have to be the top bidder to get talent to come to Alabama, right? They could be a little less or whatever because of those other things. And I think that's what you're going to see at Oregon, moving forward. You're going to see that their offers maybe need to be competitive, but they're not just out there like having to buy guys to come to Oregon and play. It's like, hey, look, we'll make you a fair offer, but you show up and you're going to make your money. We're going to help you make your real money after that. So I think that's a thing that should probably get Duck fans pretty excited, because we start seeing all these NIL numbers, right? And you start looking at some of these schools and, Ohio State and Georgia, 20 million. And I haven't seen a list yet where Oregon's been in the top 10 of NIL revenue. Now, you have to take those things with a bit of a grain of salt, right? I'm not going to just say those numbers are 100% accurate.
Sure.
But I mean, at the end of the day, it's pretty clear that Oregon's not just out there like slamming money on the table and buying whoever. I mean, sure, they're competitive, and yes, they do have NIL resources, but it's clear that some of these other things are playing a factor as well.
Yeah, and I like what you said there, just about the appeal of the Ducks and everything that they have going. You see so many people, I'm sure, on Twitter, on X, just saying, oh, well, Oregon's just buying everybody. Well, it's like, well, are you watching what they're doing on the field. I mean, I'm sure that they're competitive, like you mentioned there, but there's so much more to it than just that. So I feel like we'll be beating that drum until we're blue in the face. But as long as they keep winning, they're going to keep attracting these top level guys. The proof is in the pudding, so to speak.
No, nobody would care if Oregon was 0-13 or 0-11, right? They only hate Oregon now because they're 13-0 and getting the top dudes. That's why they're mad. So let them be mad.
Exactly. You know what you won't be mad about? You won't be mad about Ranchito Grill in Springfield. Want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor here on the Ducks Dish podcast. Not sure what your dinner plans are tonight, but head on over to Ranchito Grill at 1537 Mohawk Boulevard. Try the homemade tortillas. They got great food, a great environment, and they will take care of you. Say what's up to my guy Ruben and let him know that Max Torres sent you. Max Torres and Justin Hopkins of ScoopDuck on 3 here with you on a Monday afternoon, talking some Oregon football and Oregon football recruiting with a heavy emphasis on the transfer portal. Justin, the Ducks got 2 new commitments, but as we know, things are going to keep churning. The Ducks are going to keep working away and trying to bring in some of the top prospects from the transfer portal to build out their 2025 roster and reload. Got a couple of new developments on Monday morning. Why don't we just kind of dive into those and kind of the latest that we're hearing there?
Yeah, I mean, again, starting out the pod, I said, safety / secondary, tight end, offensive tackle specifically, but probably offensive line could just be generalized being the key positions of need. First off, I'll start off with Nevada offensive tackle Isaiah World. Is reportedly set to visit Oregon this weekend from Pete Nakos. Didn't provide an exact day, but he's obviously, coming to Oregon to take a visit. And we've talked about him already, you and I have. But again, a reminder, this is a guy that played his high school football at Lincoln High School, where Achilles Smith Jr. just won his state title down there. So, really cool to kind of have that tie in there. This is a guy that would be quote unquote plug and play at one of the tackle spots. Again, Johnny Cornelius likely gone. I'm feeling more and more like, Josh Connerly's probably headed to the NFL with where he's being projected in some of these early mock drafts. This is a guy that's moved up the boards pretty well. You see him in a lot of second rounds, early third rounds. You even see him as a late first, potentially here and there. So again, this is a guy that's moving up the draft boards over the next month. If he, as Oregon plays more games, or we hope they play more games, you could see his NFL draft stock continue and increase. So a guy like Isaiah World makes a ton of sense. I'll lead in, I guess, and you can follow up. But, Vanderbilt offensive lineman Gunnar Hansen also expected to visit Oregon Wednesday. This was, of course, from Pete Nakos with On 3 here. And that was a new name, one that kind of, popped up. Portal Pete, that name kind of popped up on the radar for all of us, I think. And, Oregon's got a knack for doing that because we weren't really, watching Theran Johnson prior to his commitment this weekend. And so to me, that kind of screams of a guy that Oregon must like in some form or fashion. Multi-year starter at Vanderbilt, and really intriguing in the way that if you look at his career, he has played both as an interior offensive lineman and as an edge guy. He's been a tackle. He's been a guard. I don't think he's ever played center, but kind of nice to have a piece like that potentially to be able to move him around a little bit. Maybe he comes in as a guard, but something happens and you need to kick him out and he can, handle that spot for a series, a quarter, a game, whatever the case might be. So I think there's a lot of value having a guy like that being able to be versatile. And, we've seen Oregon bring in offensive linemen through the transfer portal before that weren't necessarily immediate starters, but were going to be counted on as key depth guys, key players, would get snaps. And as we know, I mean, like any position on the roster, especially quarterback, you're only a play away, right? And we saw Oregon, using the offensive lineman because of injuries this year. It's going to happen. You're only a play away. The Big Ten's a very physical conference. Guys are going to get beat up, dinged up, miss time. So I could see a lot of value in a guy like Hansen as well.
I don't have a whole lot to add on World other than that you kind of like Oregon's chances because of the San Diego connection and the West Coast ties, of course. I think that obviously helps your chances if you have guys that have come from a certain part of the country and done well at Oregon. Achilles Smith Jr. is the latest one that is in line to follow on that path. But for Hansen, I think what's interesting for me is that in the past, we would maybe look at Vanderbilt and say to ourselves, oh, Vanderbilt, like, okay, whatever. They're kind of the doormat of the SEC. That's not necessarily the case anymore. Vanderbilt is turning into a quality program, and there's writings on the wall that they are certainly heading in the right direction. So I think after seeing the season that they put together this year, a couple of big wins, you look at a guy like Hansen and say, hey, that's looking more attractive than it might have a couple of years ago coming over from the beautiful city of Nashville, where On3 is headquartered. I'm very grateful I got to check that out. Actually went around the Vanderbilt campus a little bit with my cousin during my time out there. But I think this is an interesting name to track, and obviously we'll monitor it as this development kind of goes on and he makes his way out to campus. The other note that I liked that you mentioned, Justin, was about just needing to have bodies, and maybe you bring in the guy who isn't a major contributor for you right away, but he becomes a piece that you're going to lean on. And we're seeing that this year. Look at Nashad Strother. He came over from East Carolina, played a decent amount, but was also banged up a little bit last year, and he's having a pretty good season now as Oregon's primary left guard. So you like what you're seeing there, and again, kind of like what we saw with Theran Johnson, that the proof is in the pudding. You're bringing in some guys, obviously with the offensive line. You don't want to be relying on young guys, and of course, Oregon isn't the only school that's thinking that way. And you look at what they did with Strother and Dejani Cornelius as well, who became a pretty big name, but came from Rhode Island and became a major player for the Ducks. So you got to trust Malik Terry. I think he's got his recruiting hat on and the law firm, and they'd love to add one of these guys, maybe even both.
Well, I mean, both Nishad Strother and Matthew Bedford were not like headliner type transfer portal signings. They just weren't. But they both come in and been very integral, parts of this team. I know Bedford's obviously been in and out and hurt and stuff this year, so it's been a little more challenging for him compared to last year. But still, the Hansen just reminds me very much of those guys, and coming in with experience, tough guy. This guy's got a little more flexibility, position flexibility, which is nice. Probably would play at guard for Oregon if all things perfect. He would probably play guard for Oregon, but again, he could be useful. And I think Oregon's got some young guys that are good in developing an offensive line. I still think they're a class away. I think you're a class away from, really not having to lean on offensive line transfers in the portal heavily. They're not relying heavily, but they're getting a couple, right? And they'll probably get at least 2 or 3 this year, and have gotten a couple in the past. So I think they're getting closer to a point where that might not be the case, but understandably, I could see them going for 2 to 3, transfer portal guys. Now, if there's a world in which, the good Lord wants to bless Dan Lanning, Josh Conerly comes back. But I continue to be pessimistic about that, because I think he's going to have, money on the table for him to go in the NFL, and that's understandable. But
Sure.
The only thing that, I think the only thing that makes it so Oregon doesn't have to pursue as many offensive linemen as if Conerly does decide to return to Oregon. And if that happens, we are all running naked through the quad.
Well, the other wild card too that I don't think I was thinking about a whole lot with regard to the offensive line is Matthew Bedford. He's only appeared in one game this year, Justin, the last that I checked, but he is a senior. So I don't know if there's some kind of loophole or a medical red shirt of sorts that he could pursue. What do you think about the possibility of him coming back next year potentially?
I haven't heard anything about it, and it certainly makes sense. Though, I mean, we've seen players like Bowman at Oklahoma State and Cam McCormick now at Miami. Cam Rising at Utah. I mean, we're talking about guys that are on year 7 and year 8. I mean, it's insane. So kudos to them. Do your thing, man. I'm not hating. Do your thing. But I think, to your point, like you're saying, I think there could be a loophole or a world that exists where Bedford, for whatever reason, gets a medical red shirt or a medical clearance or whatever they give that might allow them to return. I don't know, but it would certainly be a factor there. And, that'd be really nice, because that would certainly shore up the interior of the offensive line if there was a world where he came back as well.
Sure. Just thought I'd bring that point to the table. Got a couple more that we want to hit on before we get out of here today, Justin. Over the weekend, we had the Heisman Trophy Award, which, of course, Oregon quarterback Dillon Gabriel was one of 4 finalists for, along with Travis Hunter, Ashton Jeanty, and Cam Ward. Travis Hunter took home the award along with the Bednarik Award and the Biletnikoff Award for the top defensive player and the top wide receiver, respectively. Jeanty finished second. Gabriel finished third. What were your thoughts on Travis Hunter taking home college football's most prestigious award?
I have more of an issue with him taking the Biletnikoff and the Bednarik awards because he really wasn't the best at either of those positions. He's a really good, talented player that can play both of those positions really well. But he was not the best receiver in college football, and he was not the best defensive back in college football, not by a mile. So I respect the Heisman just for the pure fact of, hey, here's a two-way player that plays 2 positions, a lot of snaps, plays them both at a pretty high level. But to say he was the best player at those 2 positions, I think is disrespectful to other players. And I don't even mean just at Oregon. I mean disrespectful to other players in college football. It's also a really touchy subject. It's a very divisive Heisman. You've got people that it was 100% Travis Hunter, and you've got people like, you knew ESPN was going to give it to him. Like, I'm kind of more in that camp, if I'm being honest. You knew ESPN was giving it to Travis Hunter. There was never a doubt in my mind that he was winning. I don't mean that to say Dillon Gabriel should have won it. You put me in the Ashton Jeanty camp, and I know people want to pick on him because he was in the Mountain West, but I don't care. Look at what he did, his body of work, and we know what Boise State would be without him. They wouldn't be very good without Ashton Jeanty. They certainly wouldn't be in the college football playoff like they are. So for me, it was Ashton Jeanty. That's where my vote would have gone. I don't have a vote, and that's okay. It doesn't bother me. I'm not going to lose sleep over this. But again, I take bigger issue with Travis Hunter getting those other 2 awards for being the best receiver and the best defensive back because he was neither of those things. He's really good. He's going to be a first rounder in the NFL. Very talented individual. I got no hate for the kid. I do think the Heisman should have gone to somebody else. Or I'm sorry. I'm sorry. The individual should have gone the other one. He can win the Heisman. I'm fine with that.
Sure. I think, if I'm looking at the Biletnikoff, I certainly find myself a little bit more along your line of thinking. I think Jeanty had the more outstanding season, but obviously he only plays one position. So are you going to ding him for that? I don't know. But it was a pretty close race. I think I saw between those 2. I don't remember the exact number of votes, but if we're looking at the best receiver, I don't know. I think Tyrone McMillan would certainly be in that conversation over at Arizona. You also have to think, Shedeur Sanders was throwing fades to Travis Hunter when the games were well out of reach for the Buffs. So a little bit of stat padding for sure.
And they don't run the ball.
Yeah, not at all.
So of course he's going to have yards. They only throw the ball.
So yeah, I don't want to beat a dead horse or say too much more because I think I find myself along the same line of thinking as you do. It's certainly the most unique and I guess best 2-way player in the sport. You can certainly say that. But he's a phenomenal talent and he's going to be really fun to watch in the NFL. We'll see if he follows in Deion Sanders' footsteps and attempts to go both ways there as well. But I think that that was basically all I really had to say about the Heisman. There obviously wasn't a whole lot to talk about because Gabriel finished third. But we do have one more story on the day, just kind of a quick hitter. Dana Altman and the Ducks picked up a commitment from 2025 shooting guard JJ. Oh my gosh, I'm about to forget the name. Sorry, JJ Frakes out of the state of Michigan. And he's the only commit in the 2025 class, Justin. So the Ducks are killing it on the hardwood this season. I think it was either 12-1 or 13-1 is where they're at right now as conference play gets underway. So they certainly have a lot of momentum this season, but you always got to be forward thinking. And I think basketball recruiting is a little bit different because there's so fewer spots than football. So every one of those additions is kind of going to be put under even more of a microscope.
Yeah. And before anybody roasts you for forgetting his name, we don't hang our hat on basketball recruiting. So take it easy. You guys are tuned in here because you like the football and the football recruiting news that we provide, and we do really well. But yeah, I will say this. I watched a few highlights of this kid. 6'5", pretty dynamic. Looks like he can get to the hoop pretty well too, and I really like that about him. I saw a couple people note that this was kind of one of those flyers that other teams were catching on about, and Dana Altman did a really good job and his staff identifying early and obviously landing the commitment. So I'll take all those things and say, hey, good for Oregon. But I will say this, the men's program is 10-1. They're playing some damn good basketball this season. They look really good, look like they're having fun. I'm just here to at least make sure we mention basketball. I know there's football going, and I know we're all hyped about the Rose Bowl. Oregon football's 13-0. Like, so many great things about being a Duck right now. But, you look at the men's team, they're 10-1. Nate Biddle's having a great year. Supreme Cook is really standing out. Looks like, again, we know Dana Altman, they tend to start slow and kind of start hitting their stride, in that mid-February window to late February window. And he's got this team poised. If they actually get better in that window, they just cracked the top 10. So kudos to them. Probably took a little bit of that success, and that was a big, part of landing JJ here. I'm guessing, and I'm just excited to kind of. Dana took some heat the last couple of years. I'm excited to see him turn around because that guy's been a really good basketball coach for a long time at Oregon.
Yeah, if they're able to kind of flip the script here or flip the history and have a good season the entire year, that would certainly be a great development for Dana Altman and the Ducks, and I'm sure in the eyes of many Oregon fans. But yeah, I wanted to make sure we hit a little bit on basketball because obviously that's a major sport, and the Ducks are doing well on that playing field. I don't know, I'm having a little bit of a brain fart. Apologies for that. Maybe that's a sign that we need to wind down the episode, Justin. But I don't have any more to add. Anything else you wanted to add before we got out of here?
No. Stay locked in with us, guys. There's a lot going on. Transfer portal, still a lot of 2026 recruiting. By the way, a Rose Bowl is coming up not that long. So yeah, I'm excited, and I know we'll talk about it, but I'm darn excited for this weekend of college football too. The playoffs, first round, going to be some great games, and I'm looking forward to it.
There you go. Well, make sure you stay locked in with Justin and myself. You can find Justin on Twitter/X at JHopkinsSD. Find me anywhere at mtorresports. Subscribe to the ScoopDuck on through YouTube channel and check us out at ScoopDuck.com. Come try us out and get the best in Oregon football and recruiting. But until next time, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish Podcast.